Go ahead and unmute, Irwin.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everyone. My name is Irwin, and I am an alcoholic. I'm one of them real alcoholics like the book talks about. Lost the ability to control how much I drank. You know, tonight is a very special moment in my life. I got sober November 30th, 1985. And for that, I am very grateful today. I had a birthday yesterday. It was the 39th celebration of my first life. Today is my 39th celebration of my second life. I walked back through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous at a 2:00 meeting on a Saturday afternoon. You know, how consequential is it that we're talking on a Saturday, the same day that, calendar day that I came into Alcoholics Anonymous for the third go around. And those people overwhelmingly welcomed me back with unconditional love and open arms. And I found it necessary to, appreciate what they were offering me this time. I was beat down. I had a pretty troubled childhood. I guess you could say I was born a rebel. I rebelled about it. Everything that somebody tried to get me to do or wanted me to do, I wasn't going to do it. I'll show you. I had a dad that was an alcoholic, real chronic alcoholic. He was sober the last 2 years of his life, but the destruction had already been done. Like I say, I was pretty troubled, kind of a lonely kid. My mom and dad gave me a name that the neighbor kids found out my full name, and they used to tease me about it, and it caused me to fight. And they did, it took a couple of whoopings of them before they quit doing that. But my mother and dad named me Irwin Henry Sankey. The Irwin part of it was my grandmother. That was her maiden name. And the Henry was my grandfather that I never got to meet. And I think he may have been alcoholic also. I had a real fatal accident on the railroad and lost a leg. He got trapped underneath one of the wheels, and it took his leg off. They was able to get a tourniquet on him and save him, but he had a stump that he was with that I remember. Like I say, I don't remember much about him because I was still probably 1 or 2 years old. But I watched my dad's alcoholism progress, and I don't know. In some ways, I thought that was a pretty cool deal. He would sit out in the backyard in the summertime and ask us to go get him a beer, and my little sisters never stood a chance. I was a bully, and I got in there, and even if they got there before I did, I'd take that thing away from him and take it back out to him because I knew what the reward was. I got to have some of it, and those little things like that, I'm pretty ashamed of today. I've got my 2 sisters. They both have forgiven me for, everything that I did, but it's still something that kind of haunts me, the way I treated them. They were good to me, but I was a kind of a butthole to them. And, this stuff started progressing with me after I would get those beers for him and take them out. I'd take a little bit bigger drink and then I started getting into their liquor cabinet. They had a gentleman that would donate them a liter to a full quart of some of the best booze that you could buy for New Year's Eve, and they would have one drink out of that bottle and put it back up there on the shelf, and it was top shelf, about 10-foot ceiling in that house. And over a period of time before they moved to Arkansas, I had consumed most of that stuff that was up in there and just put water back into it. They never did figure that one out. The only time he figured something out was when I was getting into his cold whiskey in the icebox in the freezer. He'd keep a pint up there, and I'd take a little nip out of it when I was home at lunch and put a little water back into it. And I got caught with that one. He says, somebody's been in my whiskey. There's ice cubes, ice crystals in my whiskey. Yeah, I had a few drinks of it, Dad. I finally admitted it to him, and he just kind of winked at me. But like I say, I had a pretty troubled childhood. He was very violent, when he was drinking. He would, I watched him for about, we lived over on the east side of town, and you could go down, on my days off, you could go down there and see him coming to the drive-up window of this liquor store between 9:30 and 10 o'clock in the morning. That was the first jug. Then he would stop by another liquor store on the way to the house for lunch and buy another jug. And by the time he got home that night, he was pretty well toasted. And if it was a bad day at work, if you looked at him wrong, he was going to take the brunt of the punishment that was coming to somebody else. So I took some very horrendous beatings, and after a period of time, I could stand there and let him beat on me and never utter a tear, a sound, or anything. And after he was done, I'd turn around and point my finger at him and say, one of these days, I'm going to get you. Well, that happened when I was about 17 years old. I finally got the best of that man. He'd come down there to beat me after I'd been working for him all day. And no, you're not going to do it tonight. And he got the belt out and started on me, and I caught it with my forearm. But I come across with pretty right, left jabs, and knocked him up against the mirror where I thought I hurt him. I know I dazed him. And I grabbed my clothes and was going up the stairs to get out of that house. And he said, you get back down here. I said, I ain't sticking around here tonight. You're too crazy for me. And he come up the stairs and told me to get back in the house. I said, no, I ain't coming back in the house, but why don't you come down here where I got a little room to finish the job? Because I was hot at that time, and he would never come down. Over all the years that I've had the relationship with him, he would never let me forget that I took advantage of him. And I just always say, no, Dad, I just finally stood up for myself. Some of the stuff that you had done to me through the years, it just had to end. You used to always tell me that I wasn't ever going to amount to anything. I was worthless. Just all this negative stuff that had come out of him. And I got in trouble that same time of year, 17 years old. We went to a wedding with one of my friends, and there was booze there. And we was all sitting around drinking it, and there was a deputy sheriff that was really trying to make a name for himself, and he caught wind that there was this wedding party going on over at this one place, and there was a whole bunch of us that was minors that didn't have any business being there drinking anyhow. We could have been at the party, but wasn't supposed to be drinking alcohol. And when we heard that he was coming, he turned on his siren and come over there, and a whole bunch of us took off. Well, there was three of us that got to go to court about it for eluding the officer, resisting arrest, and drunk as minors. And we stood up in front of a judge that had some children that were Hellraisers also. They both all had records as long as my forearm. And she looked at all three of us that day and she says, this Mr. Terry and myself have been talking about this, and we got to try to put an end to you minors drinking the way you're drinking anymore. We've had a bunch of you in front of us here lately, and what we've decided to do is give you a choice. 6 months in county, or you can go to the service of your choice. Oh, shit. Next day I was down there and we flipped a coin and we wound up going to the United States Navy for 4 years on the kiddie cruise. It really helped with my alcoholism because those guys that I was stationed with, I was old enough to be in the service. I was old enough, they felt that I was old enough to be able to drink. Didn't have any problem when I was overseas, but getting it when I was in the United States was a little problem. I was in there about 2 years, and I had a yeoman friend on the ship that I was on that helped me fake my ID card, my Navy ID card, and he was pretty good at it because they had to ask me. The FBI guy asked me how in the heck we did such a good job. Well, I was around the same typewriter that those ID cards was made on, and we just typed out numbers that would match the same ones that was on there and slid a little piece of it out, put that number in there, and it got me a lot of booze before I got caught with it. And the one that caught me was the same deputy sheriff, and he was now sheriff. He was the same one that got me to go to the Navy. He was the same one that caught me on that New Year's Eve that we was out there at the fairgrounds. Well, you're not old enough to be drinking. I come in there with a couple jugs under my arm and a 6-pack of beer, and we was going to party that night. Darn if he didn't remember that I wasn't that old, and I wound up hearing the jail cell door close on New Year's Eve. Just right about time that the bells and whistles went off in the town. And my dad let me sit there all night. And then I had to go in and have a investigation with the FBI and all that stuff the next week. And they asked me how I had done that, and I had to show them. I said, well, we just scratched a little bit of that plastic off and put this in right over top of my numbers, and it seemed to work. And so, I could have faced a discharge going back to the Navy for falsifying that ID card, but they said, well, you go back to the Navy and behave yourself, and we'll forget about this problem. And I did for the next 2 years that I was in there. Come home and I got home a little bit before I turned 21, but it was still time to go out there and party, and me and this one friend that I'd went in the Navy with, we was trying to uh, catch up for old times, I guess, and Jim and I'd go into the old Beacon Club. We used to call it Streaking to the Beacon. And it had a pretty good national name as far as being a rowdy Allen bar. But we was in there, and this one lady that'd been serving the strength for a while, the night that I turned 21, we went in there having a party about it. She said, you realize how much trouble you could have caused us by you being in here before you was 21? I said, no. I said, I really didn't realize it, and I really didn't care. You was serving me booze, and that's what I wanted. Wow. What a life. And that went on for, God, another 19 years. 18 years, I guess. And I was I got routed out of one bar that was, a place that I never thought I should have been booted out of there, but old Bert Noli, he got tired of me fighting in there all the time, and he says, "You're 86'd out of here permanently. I don't want to see you in here ever again, Irwin." I said, "Okay, sir." And I stayed away from that one and found another one to rowdy on down at. You know, I've said it numerous times in meetings that I'm very grateful that I didn't get shot or knifed or beat up for dead. You know, it was a real rowdy crowd that I was hanging around, and that's the way they done business if you made them mad. You know, they was pretty tough stuff. And I don't know, I guess it was part of me that I enjoyed fighting. You know, might have to look at me wrong and I could take a punch at you. Sad news, especially when I was on the alcohol. You know, I got the first DUI in April of 1978. I was working the oil field and I was out on sales call, and we'd stopped up this one place in Big Piney and had a few beers and then come on down the road, and I was going back down to Labarge, Wyoming. And this pickup that I had, it was about 7 months old. And I don't know whether all of you remember how they used to put the culverts over the crossings or the creek crossings, and then they'd pour a cement apron out alongside where that wouldn't wash out. Well, I jumped the wheel off one of them and hit the other one and flipped that pickup 1.5 times both directions. And it was bad enough that you could put it in the back of another pickup. I got to believe today that God that I understand today was with me the whole smear. You know, I walked away from that with a broken collarbone and cuts and contusions. I mean, I was still alive. Stood before that judge up there in Big Piney, and she said, "Well, you kind of had a little bit too much to drink." I said, "No, Your Honor, I only had a couple beers that night. Well, this alcohol blood level reading we got 0.28 tells me that you was pretty drunk." I said, "Yes, Your Honor, I was drunk. And that should have never happened. I should never been driving, but I had to go back to Rock Springs where I was out of. Never made it." And she said, "Well," she says, "we're going to suspend your license for 6 months, $350 fine, and I want you to go to 12 AA meetings." Oh, what a horrendous thing to think about. So I showed up to Alcoholics Anonymous for the very first time, October 17th, 1978. You know, and those same people that I seen the last time that I walked in here, they were there the very first time that I came. They welcomed me there, and you know, I'd say that I was an alcoholic, but I did that more or less to make them make sure that they accepted me. I didn't really think I was alcoholic. You know, I lived in those 3 Ds for a lot of years: deception, denial, and delusion. You know, and for some reason, I managed to do my 12 meetings and I hung around there for another year and 2 months. And we was at a Christmas party the next year, and my ex-wife now said that, well, you've been off of it for a little over a year. You ought to be able to take care of it, handle it. Oh, Jesus. Is that something you're supposed to tell an alcoholic? Well, yeah, I could handle it. So I showed her, I said, I'll just have creamed mint on the rocks tonight. So I got one of those old fashioned glasses that they used to make them highballs out of, and I had them pour a double shot of creamed mint over the rocks. I had two of them. And when I walked away from that party that night, I walked out that door and gave myself a pat on the back. You done good tonight. You got it under control again. Lo and behold, the next Friday, I was struck drunk worse than I was when I got off of it, when I had that bout up there in Big Piney. You know, this is a progressive illness, and I didn't understand that for a lot of years. But you know, it's progressing in me to this day, even with the amount of sobriety that I have under my belt. But I got drunk and it went on for a little while, and she gave me the ultimatum that I either do something about my drinking again, or that she was going to load everything that we had and go up live with Mama and Daddy up in Powell. So I got off the booze again. Lo and behold, another 2.5 years. I didn't drink. I didn't have sobriety. I had what I call sobriety. Oh my gosh, what a miserable way to live. And you haven't got anything that you can take that away, like I used to use the alcohol do. You know, and then my friend that I worked with out in the oil field, he had a massive stroke. He was in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous for 5 years when I got back in here the third time. And this is the sort of drunk that he had to have that stuff to get him out of bed in the morning. It was that bad. I drank with him, and I seen a change in this guy that really was overwhelming to see, because he was pretty hardcore. You know, we worked in the oil field, and the jobs that I was on, that man, he prided himself that we never had a leak in the lines that we laid. Basically because they was cleaned out properly and oiled and hammered up together real tight. You know, and we'd test lines to 10,000 pounds and never have a drip. That's how hardcore the man was. And he was also pretty hardcore with his drinking. But after he'd been around Alcoholics Anonymous for 5 years, there was a softness about that guy that was incredible. You know, I seen the tough side of RB and I seen the wonderful side of RB. And I finally worked up enough courage to, would you show me how you did this to stay sober, RB? He says, yeah. He said, let's get together next Friday. We'll have lunch and we'll talk about it. I never got to have that meeting with him. That Friday morning, he had a massive stroke that paralyzed his whole left side. And the only place that they could take care of him was in the nursing home. You know, I talk about these people and it brings out the emotions. Still miss them. Wish they were here. But, you know, it was God's choice to take him home. You know, I didn't drink real soon after that happened, but things started getting worse around the house. And I moved out for a while, about 3 months, had my own little apartment and was still going along okay. And she finally come and caught me one night after I got home from I worked out in the oil field moving rigs, and we was gone out of town quite a little, but You know, she'd kind of keep an eye on that place, and when I'd get home, she'd come and see me. She asked me to come help her with the kids. I said, well, you get this place cleaned up where I get my full deposit back, and I said, I'll come out there and help you. Well, she went in there when I was out the next time and cleaned it all up. And I told them I was moving out, and they handed me my deposit back, and I moved back in with her. Little did I know, she'd already had a set of divorce papers drawn up, and she presented me with them on a Friday morning. Hadn't been home quite a week. She just didn't like my attitude. And she followed through with a divorce. Well, what's a good alky do? You got to go down there and commiserate with your buddies. Poor me. Pour me another drink, will you? Away we go again. You know, and like I said earlier, this thing is progressive and things were getting worse. And I was able to keep a job for a while. And I got that last DUI and first January 1985, and the guy that I was working for at the time, he'd gotten one also, and he was worried about his insurance going through the roof. We can't have too many of these drunks driving truck for us or driving vehicles. So I got laid off. So it was a little tough there for a while. A little tough, and I found enough work to where I had a roof over my head and food in my belly and enough money to buy booze. But that was about all I was doing, just existing. Miserable way to live. You know, and the ones that I was with they were just as bad with drinking as what I was, you know. So I don't know, you know, there's one little guy that was a bartender in the Oregon Trail that I used to go into in the afternoons when we get back and have a few beers with him. And the little guy would sit there. He was a bartender, but he'd sit behind that bar and drink 3 beers to my 1. And he was a little man. And you know, he had a constitution that was unreal. He was up at 5 a.m. every morning and jogged 1.5 to 2 miles. How do you do that? And drink the beer that he was drinking? You know, and we got to be real good friends, and he knew I was in trouble with that last DUI. So we'd go down to this one other bar to close it down for the evening and have another beer or two and call it a night. And I'd get started on the whiskey. I love to drink Crown Royal. I'd get started on that, and he'd come over and say, Irwin, give me your keys. You ain't driving home tonight. And you know how good that man was? He'd take me home and would jog back down there to that bar to pick his pickup up. Another emotional moment coming up. Walked back in the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, November 30th, 1985. And I was about 24 days sober. And we were headed towards Powell to have Christmas with Mama and Daddy. And I wanted to stop by the Oregon Trail and let David and his barmaid, know what I'd been doing for the last 24 days. And she raised so much hell with me that I just drove right on past. We was going to be late. Didn't want to be late for dinner. And I think she was probably worried about that I was going to go in there and have a drink. All I wanted to do was go in and wish them a Merry Christmas and let them know what I'd been doing for the last 24 days. We came back to town the 27th. And I definitely wanted to go down there and wish him a belated Merry Christmas. And I walked in there and his barmaid was behind the bartending bar. And I said, "Where's David at?" She said, "You didn't hear?" I said, "No, I've been out of town for the last 3 days."
Speak up.
I says, "What happened?" So well, he died of an aneurysm Christmas Eve. There was a thought there that I ought to just get a double shot and screw it. But then the next thought was, you go down there and commiserate this misery to your friends at 917 North Beach, Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's where I went. And I got through that all right. You know, it's still sad when I think about it yet to this day. It's one of them touching moments in my life. This man really cared about me, was trying to help me out. And then all of a sudden he's not with us anymore. I've been through some good things and some bad things. You know, that's life on life's terms. You know, I finally wound up moving out from that gal that we never did get remarried, and they didn't have common law down in Wyoming, so I didn't have to get another divorce. I just moved out after I about almost ruined my life for the rest of my life. She knew how to push my buttons. And I was insanely crazy one night after she got done working on me. And I was trying to leave and just get away from it where nothing happened. And she come out the back door and started beating on my back and hit me on the arms and stuff. And I finally spun around and caught both of her arms and I took her to the ground, right down on the sidewalk. And I had both of her arms pinned. And that insane thought went on up here. I could grab this bee by the ears and I could take her out of her misery for the rest of her life. And all of a sudden I threw my hands in the air and I got up off the top of her and I says, "I ain't got time to mess with you tonight. I gotta go." I went right in and talked with my sponsor, shared it with him. He says, "Irwin," he says, "you're going to have to do something different than what you've been doing. Or I'll guarantee you're either going to drink again or you're going to be winding up in prison for the rest of your life." Thank God for Rod. Another one of them pillars in my sobriety. I've had a lot of those pillars in my sobriety. You know, these people, there's a camaraderie that goes on around these rooms and in these meetings that hard to explain, but it's powerful. I believe it's a God in all of you working in the God in me. And, you know, it's amazing. And the last 3 years now, I lost some real close friends that I've had for a number of years. My sponsor, he lacked about 17 days of having 50 years when he graduated. Or when he graduated. He got sick and went in the hospital and he passed.
Mm-hmm.
Had another guy that I saw a lot of up in Red Lodge, and he was in Washington, D.C. for a lot of years. and was a great help to the Native Americans around the country. It didn't make, he was from up around Poplar, Wolf Point area, and we got to go to his 100th birthday. The man had 57 years of continuous sobriety. And he turned 100 years old on the 16th of December, and he passed about 36 hours later on the 18th.
Mhm.
Last one that I had was a sponsor. He sponsored me more or less over the phone. We got together every time. We'd have some good talks. When he'd come up here, we'd go down there. And he was another pillar in my sobriety. Guy by the name of Fritz, in the Cowboy Hall of Fame for saddle bronc riding. He would have had 62 years the 1st of December this year. He passed on the 6th of October this year, 95 years old. You know, these are people that I've really been dependent on. Fritz and I used to talk 2-3 times a week. I'd call him or he'd call me, and there'd be a time or two that he'd call me a couple times extra. And he said, "I'm not calling too much, am I?" I said, "Oh, hell no, I enjoy talking to you. You got some jokes and you carry on like, you know." And he had a real good memory. Another treat that he gave me was a couple, 3 years ago, and I value it. I'd like to take it to my grave with me, but I'll pass it on to somebody else. It's a Marty Mann book, the yellow book that she came out with. Wow. You know, and his son didn't know that his dad had given it to me a couple, 3 years ago. We was down there. He had they had a house, and he had one bedroom that had 3 walls with 3 4x8 pieces of plywood with nails in it for all the belt buckle collection that he had over the years that he'd come across all the years. His wife, he built shelves for his wife around the rooms, the living room, and the dining room, and the kitchen, that had teapots on them. And there wasn't a single one of them that was a duplicate. You know, these people were something that, wow. You know, they were a blessing in my life and Sharon's lives. You know, Sharon and I have been married for 35 years. And believe it or not, she's the best thing that's ever happened to me besides Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm so grateful today. I'm grateful and very privileged to be here to share with you tonight. You know, and Elizabeth, I haven't seen her in these rooms for a while. She used to co-host when Kevin was doing it. And she's the one that set this up almost a year ago. I said, if I can make it to that birthday, I would love to share it with everybody that comes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and Sharon's been around advertising it all week. He's talking Saturday night on the SIG. And there's a bunch of them that I saw here tonight. And I appreciate each and every one of you coming here. You know, and I don't know how much more I can say, but I thoroughly love this fellowship. It's been a godsend in my life, just like all of you people are. You know, I'm going to continue to come to this thing and try to pass on what I've learned and what happened, and you know, and listen to all your shares. That's the way we get through this thing together. You know, like that first word in the first step, it's a we deal.
Mhm.
I can't do it by myself.
Mhm.
So I hope you'll all continue to keep coming. I know I'm sure gonna do it. And one more thing, I love and care about each and every one of you in here tonight. Please keep coming back. Thank you.
Yay. Oh my God.